Okay, so today we have the nice honor of having Nikanj uh, from Princeton University giving us a talk about a mathematical exploration of why language models help solve downstream tasks. So Nikanj has done a series of nice works on this topic on representation learning in general, and this joint work with his advisor Sanjeev Arora, which you guys might have heard of. I mean, this is a very, you know, the topic that's very relevant these days, right? Because we have GPT-3 and all these like large language models, which are really changing the way we think about AI. Having a good, mathematical understanding of their behavior would be very helpful. So yeah, so Nikanj, take it away.
Hi. Thanks, Greg, for the invitation and for the kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for showing up to the talk. Um, so as Greg said, I will be talking about our work on mathematical exploration of language models. And as for questions, etc., please feel free to stop me at any point and ask a question or even type the question up on chat. I will be taking occasional breaks in between for like between sections. So like I will stop for questions as well. Okay, so language models. So what are they? So at a very high level, language modeling is aims to learn the distribution of natural language. So it wants to assign probabilities to pieces of text. And a prevalent way to do so is through next word prediction. That is, given a context or a piece of text S, a language model wants to predict what is the next word that could follow this given context. Sorry. And it does so by outputting a distribution over the set of all words. And for a given context, say in this case, it's I went to the cafe and ordered a. One would hope that a language model would assign high probabilities to words like latte and cappuccino or bagel that could potentially follow this context, and low probabilities to words that might not, like dolphin. And a language model is typically parameterized by some neural network architecture of choice, and it's trained by using a lot of unlabeled data. So unlabeled data is used to generate these pairs of context and next words. So you can just take, let's say, all of Wikipedia and look at all sentences in it, and then just split them and construct these uh, rest of the sentence and the next word pairs. And then you can train this language model or learn the weights of the neural network that's parameterizing it by minimizing the standard cross entropy objective that's prevalent in machine learning. So in this case, it's an expectation over the pairs of S and W. And at a high level, what this is trying to do is assigning high probabilities PS towards W for the pairs S, W that were observed in the text corpus. So this kind of makes sense. You want to assign high probabilities to words that do follow context. And this simple strategy of training a language model using the cross entropy objective on unlabeled data actually turned out to be useful for downstream text classification tasks, many of them. And in fact, with improvements in the architecture, model architecture used, and using a larger model and a larger set of authors, these language models trained using the same process, but on a larger text corpus and a larger model could help with a bunch of downstream tasks like text generation, question answering, machine translation, and even sentence or text classification tasks. So just pre-training it using this cross-entropy objective on unlabeled data could help with a lot of these tasks. And in fact, with an even larger model trained on an even larger text corpus with an even larger set of authors, uh, same language models, or at least trained in the same way, could not only solve these tasks, but could solve them with very little labeled data required from these tasks. So in some sense, it improved the sample efficiency of these downstream tasks. And this is quite interesting. And the main focus of our work is in trying to understand this incredible success of language modeling on downstream tasks. In particular, why is it the case that solving the task of next word prediction helps with different looking downstream NLP tasks and also requires very little label data for those tasks? And in fact, this question is a subcase of the following question, which is why should solving any particular task A help with a different task B with little data? And in some sense, this is not very surprising because humans can do this all the time. So you can transfer knowledge and skills learned by solving one task to another task. For example, the skills of being able to balance or making turns that you acquire while learning to ride a bicycle can definitely help you learn to ride a motorcycle much more efficiently. Similarly, getting trained to get a degree in math can potentially help with doing well at law school later. For example, skills like proving statements or making arguments, etc. And perhaps a more classical example is that of the movie Karate Kid, where, without giving much spoilers, the protagonist wishes to learn karate. However, his instructor, instead of teaching him karate for the first couple of months, asks him to do some really basic chores like painting the fence or scrubbing the floor or waxing a car. And this frustrated the protagonist. But it turned out that some of the hand movements and general motions that were required to do these basic chores ended up helping him learn karate, and he could learn the karate moves much more effectively because a lot of the movements are the same. And note that in this case, in doing the basic chores, not a lot of explicit supervision was required because he kind of knew how to do these things. He just had to do them. So, given that humans can do this, that is, solve a task A and use it to solve another task B, it would be nice to have machine learning agents or intelligent agents also have this property. And in fact, this could be the key to designing flexible intelligent agents, because you want them to generalize beyond the tasks that they were trained on. So with this larger question at mind, I would divide the talk in the following way. So in the first half of the talk, I'll just talk about an instantiation of this framework of task A helping task B, that is self-supervised representation learning, where in task A, is solved using unlabeled data where you don't have explicit labels. And task B is a downstream task of interest. And after that, I'll describe our results specifically for language modeling, which is a subcase of self-supervised learning, where the task A is that of next word prediction and task B is a downstream NLP task. Okay, so I'll dive straight into self-supervised learning. So we all know that in the last decade or so, supervised learning has been quite successful. So supervised learning uses labeled training data to learn a model, and this model then eventually is tested on labeled examples from the same distribution that were not seen during training. And this paradigm has been quite successful and has even beaten human performance on many tasks, image and text tasks. However, one issue with supervised learning is that it does require label data, and this can be sometimes expensive to obtain, since it might require human annotators or in some case even domain experts. Unlabeled data, on the other hand, is quite cheap to obtain because there's a lot of unlabeled data. There's a lot of text available on the internet, and there's no dearth of videos or images on the internet as well. And these are not explicitly labeled by anyone, or maybe weakly labeled, but they're just available there. And self-supervised learning is kind of trying to get the best of both worlds. So in other words, it uses unlabeled data to construct labels or tasks out of that unlabeled data. And now, once you have these tasks, you can use the machinery that we have for supervised learning that works so quite well to solve these constructed tasks. And in fact, Turing Award winner Jan LeCun has been quoted saying that this is one of the most important problems in AI today, that is self-supervised learning. So given that this is an important problem, I'll just go into a bit more detail for how self-supervised learning works. So as I said, the main idea is to use unlabeled data to construct labels or tasks. And in the first stage, you can pre-train a model, that is learn the weights of a particular neural network architecture, let's say, on the self-supervised task that was constructed using unlabeled data. And once you have such a pre-trained model, you can use it on downstream tasks in one of many ways. So one standard approach is to use this pre-trained model as an initialization for another model. And this model can potentially be fine-tuned, using the labeled data that is available for the downstream task. Another popular approach is to extract features or representations from the pre-trained model. For example, you can use the output for any input, you can use the output of the penultimate layer of the neural network or any intermediate layer as representations. You can fix them and then learn a classifier on top of these representations using the label data. And in many cases, given specific details of the task and knowledge of the architecture, you can come up with more innovative ways. So in this talk, I will be focusing on this second strategy, which is extracting fixed representations and learning classifiers on top of this, because this is also quite successful in practice. And in fact, in many cases, this can obtain, more recently, it can now obtain performances close to that of supervised learning with, and in NLP, actually, it can also beat supervised learning methods with very little table data required from those tasks. So just to give a flavor of what these self-supervised learning methods look like, I'll give a few examples. So contrastive learning is a very popular paradigm in self-supervised learning, where you use unlabeled data, and the goal is to learn a representation function or some neural network that can learn representations such that it assigns similar representations to similar pairs, and more similar than, let's say, a random point. And these similar pairs and these random points are constructed using unlabeled data. For example, for images, you could perhaps take two patches from the same image and treat them as similar pairs, and they are going to be more similar than, let's say, a random patch from another image. Or in text, you could say consecutive sentences from a large piece of text are likely to be more similar than a random sentence. Another approach is that of image reconstruction, where you can reconstruct part of an input given the rest of it. For example, you can just use unlabeled images. You can separate all images into the color channel and the black and white version, and you can try to predict the colors from the black and white version of the image. Or for text, you can just take a piece of text, delete a few words, and try to predict the deleted word from the rest of the text. Language modeling is also a type of self-supervised learning method, because you can just use unlabeled data, as I said, and split them into the context or the history and the next word, and try to predict the next word given the history. And in all of these, representation learning is quite effective. That is, you pre-train a model on these and you extract these fixed features and learn linear classifiers on top of them using the label data. And an interesting question arises, that is, why should any of these tasks help with certain downstream tasks of interest? That is, it's a priori not clear why should being able to predict the color of an image given the black and white version should actually help with the downstream task of, let's say, image classification. And actually, we have, for this question, we have very limited mathematical understanding so far. And certain basic questions that you would want to answer are, why do they end up learning useful representations? And why can these representations then reduce the sample complexity, or that is, reduce the need for label data for downstream tasks? And existing theoretical frameworks, in some sense, fail to capture this precise setting, where task A is, first of all, trained using unlabeled data. It's very different from the task B of interest. And in some sense, in many cases, it's also agnostic to task B. So you might not know what the task B is while you're solving task A. And in our work, we initiate understanding for the case of language modeling, which is also a self-supervised learning method. I would like to point out that there is some theory building up for self-supervised learning. Most of it is actually just scratching the surface. So there's a lot more to explore there. And our approach to language modeling is somewhat related, but in many ways different from the approaches for other methods like contrastive learning or image reconstruction, etc. Okay, so now I'll go on to describe our work for language models. And this is joint work with Sadhika Maladi, who's a grad student at Princeton, and Sanjeev Arora, who is our advisor. Okay, so as I said earlier, language models just take an input context S, which could be a partial sentence, and outputs a distribution over words that could follow this given context S. So just like the self-supervised learning pipeline, in the first stage, you pre-train a language model on the task of next word prediction using unlabeled data. And then you use the language model for the downstream task of interest. And the question we want to answer is, why should solving next word prediction help with downstream NLP tasks with limited data? And to answer this question, we restrict ourselves to the following theoretical setting, where first, we are interested in the role of the next word prediction task itself and the cross entropy objective that is used. And we, in some sense, ignore the inductive biases of the particular model architecture that is used to train these models, or the algorithm like ADAM or gradient descent that is used to train this algorithm. So we basically treat the model and the algorithms as black boxes, and are first interested in the more basic question of why should the task of next word prediction help, and why is the cross entropy objective useful? And also we focus our attention on the downstream task of text classification. I mean, of course, there are many other NLP tasks of interest, but for now we stick to text classification. And as I said earlier, we will be interested in the representation learning perspective, where we take fixed features and we do not fine tune those features. And this already does what quite well in practice, actually. Okay, so in this setting, the precise question that we're interested in is, given a language model, can we extract certain d-dimensional or low-dimensional features for context, such that when you're given a text classification task, let's say that of movie reviews and sentiment classification of movie reviews, you can use the feature map to embed all the sentences to this d-dimensional vector space. And then you want to learn a linear classifier that separates the two classes. And thus the question now reduces to, why can language models that do well in the cross entropy objective, that is language models that do well on next word prediction, why can they learn features that can linearly solve classification tasks of interest, text classification tasks of interest? And for this question, we take the following approach. So we first observe and argue that text classification tasks of interest can actually be rephrased as sentence completion problems in many cases. And this is actually a kind of an observation that has been made, kind of made in the past, and also is being explored more recently. And we can then formalize this idea of sentence completion reformulation to a mathematical notion of natural classification task that I'll describe later. And using this formalization, we can show guarantees for language models that look like the following. That is, language models that are epsilon optimal in the cross entropy objective can learn features that will linearly solve natural classification tasks up to an error of square root epsilon. Thus, if epsilon is small, that is, if a language model is doing well on next word prediction, then at least in terms of upper bound, you know that you're doing well on classification tasks of interest. Okay, so I'll just pause here to see if there are any questions about self-supervised learning or the language modeling framework that I just described, and overview of our results. Okay, great. So now I'll move on to the first part, that is understanding next word prediction and classification tasks of interest and how they are connected to the sentence completion reformulation. So yeah, so language models want to output a distribution over words for any given context S. And the first question, natural question to ask is, what should even this distribution P sub S be? That is, what is the ideal distribution for this, for any context S? And know that for any context, there is no single correct answer, or there is no single correct completion for any given context. Because if you ask, if you poll humans, you're going to get not just one answer, but you might get a distribution over a set of words for any given context. So we capture this uncertainty into this ground truth distribution over words, P star of S, that is the distribution over words to follow a given context S. And this ground truth distribution will actually be determined by the unlabeled text corpus that is going to be used to train the language model. And now, at least at a high level, the hope for language modeling is to be able to at least learn this ground truth distribution P star of S for any context S. Okay, so now suppose we have a classification task, let's say a binary classification task of sentence classification. We're now going to see how we can reformulate this as a sentence completion problem. So as I said in the last slide, language modeling is hoping to learn the ground truth distribution P star of S for every S. So in order to understand why language models help with downstream tasks, it makes sense to ask an even more basic question, which is, why should the ground truth distribution P star of S that language modeling hopes to learn even help solve this task P? So for this case of sentiment classification, let's try to see if it does help. So suppose you're given a movie review, and I also give you access to the ground truth distribution P star of S for the words that can follow this movie review. Can you solve this task using this P star of S? And if I give you a few seconds or a couple of minutes, I'm sure you'll come up with certain interesting ways to solve this task. One very simple approach is to just compare the probabilities of two tokens the smile and the sad emoticons. And since a smile emoticon is more likely to follow a positive movie review, this might be a pretty good indicator of the sentiment of the movie review. And in fact, you can rephrase this strategy as a linear classifier on top of the vector of ground truth probabilities or next word distribution, where you assign a weight +1 to the smile emoticon and -1 to the sad emoticon. So good. So we now can see that you can rephrase a classification task as a sentence completion problem. However, in fact, we can do better. So we can note that this ground truth distribution has probabilities for many words. So we would like to use the information in this more effectively. And one simple way to do so is to add a prompt at the end of all movie reviews. So you could add a prompt, "this movie is," at the end of all reviews. And now you could query the probabilities of a much larger set of words, indicative adjectives like good, boring, brilliant, etc. And now you can perhaps take a weighted combination of these probabilities to get an indication of what the sentiment might be. So different weights could denote how different words are indicative of sentiment to different degrees. So that's why you could use a weighted combination. And in fact, the strategy of adding a prompt not only allows us to use a larger set of grammatically correct completions, but you can also extend the strategy to other tasks. As we'll see later, for a topic classification like task, you can add a different prompt and then query the probabilities of certain words of interest. So I'll just pause here for a second to see if there are any questions about this reformulation. Okay, so I mean, in theory, this idea sounds interesting. The next question is, does this reformulation actually hold in practice? Does it stand? So yeah, so we want to now verify whether you can actually reformulate classification tasks like this. And note that I just said earlier that this reformulation is equivalent to being able to solve the task using a linear classifier on top of the vector of probabilities for a subset of words of interest. However, since we don't have the ground truth distribution P star of S, then what we do instead is we look at the output probabilities of words outputted by a pre-trained language model instead as a proxy for the ground truth distribution. And now for the classification task of sentiment classification of movie reviews, we observe the following. So in the first case, we just look at the probabilities of two tokens, the smile and the sad emoticons. And we just use this two-dimensional feature and now train a linear classifier on top of this using the label data for the downstream task. And we find that you can already get much better than random guessing performance. So random guessing is around 50% for this task. So just using probabilities of two words can already, from pre-trained language model, can already get a pretty decent performance. And now if we go ahead and look at a probability of, let's say, a set of around 30 words that were just selected based on what makes sense. So there was like not real much cherry picking. It's just words that make sense for sentiment. You can get much better performance now. You can get up to 85%. And the second row here denotes the case where we actually added a prompt at the end of the movie review. And you see that in both cases, this boosts the performance. So in some sense, this kind of, at least in some way, verifies the sentence completion reformulation. And in fact, we also observe this for another task of classifying news articles into one of four topics: science, politics, business, and sports. It's pretty much the same pattern. So just using one word per class and using around a 4-dimensional vector can already get you around 75%. And using a larger set of indicative words can get you around 86%. And just for some baseline comparison, bag of words is a very standard baseline used in NLP, which is just looking at the set of all words and ignoring the order of the words. And you can see that you can easily at least get close to this baseline or even beat it in the case of sentiment classification using this simple strategy. And also note that we don't use any information about the architecture or the algorithm. All we use is the output probabilities from the language model. Okay, so I'll just pause here for some questions. I can see some questions on the chat as well. So classification output as a projection of a more detailed output. Right. Yes. So if I interpret it correctly, I guess this is a comment that classification task in some sense is a projection of this larger or more complicated task of next word prediction that the pre-training task is solving. So the question here, another question is, what is the pre-training task here? So the pre-training task is just next word prediction, as I described earlier, which is you take a large text corpus and you learn a model that minimizes the cross entropy objective. So yeah, I'll get into the detail of the pre-training task actually soon. And there's another question, changing sentiment classification into a pre-training task. So okay, so just to clarify, the sentiment classification task here is independent of the pre-training. So the pre-training happens without knowing the sentiment task or any other task of interest. It's just the pre-trained model on next word prediction. And you can just use the outputs of this pre-trained model to solve the sentiment classification task. So I hope that answers the question. So there's another question, which is, what's the issue with transfer learning like this? Would it make most open source models pretty much the same if they all have the same pre-trained models? Okay, so I'm not sure I interpret the question correctly, but the question is, let's see. So my interpretation would be, can you use different pre-trained models that are trained using some different strategies or different architectures? So if I use GPT-2 across different tasks, would it be the same? Okay, so you could use the same model, same language model for a bunch of downstream tasks. You would potentially use it in different ways. For example, especially in the strategy of adding a prompt, you would add a prompt at the end of all inputs and then query the language model. I'll actually get into details of how to use the language models, pre-trained language models, better for a downstream task in maybe a few slides. So this slide here is just to demonstrate the idea that the sentence completion reformulation can be verified in practice. I'll get into details about like practical models, and I'll get back to these results as well later, actually. Okay. Also, yeah, feel free to unmute and ask me question if I haven't answered the question.
And so what's the purpose of comparing against BaggerWorks here? What's the takeaway?
Right. So I guess the purpose is just to show that here you can not only get better than a random performance, but using the simple strategy of sentence completion, like this viewing it as sentence completion, you can already get pretty decent performance using like a 30-dimensional vector, essentially.
Okay, so
yeah.
So BaggerWorks is not using the pre-trained model.
Right. So yeah, this is just a baseline that does not use any language model or anything. It's just like for every sentence, you have this very high dimensional feature that is basically the size of the feature is the number of words, and you have a 1 or a 0 depending on whether that word is present in the
Yeah, I understand. But the previous two columns are using the pre-trained model, right?
Right, they are, yes.
So I guess like I mean, shouldn't we expect the pre-trained model to perform better than BaggerWorks, like on AG News?
Right. So I guess if you use the pre-trained model correctly, then yes, you would expect it to do better. But I guess, I mean, there's a more basic question of why should the pre-trained model even be useful for sentiment classification or AG News, right? Because the pre-trained model was just the probabilities, just denoted the probabilities of the next word. So, and in the previous slide, I was trying to establish a connection between why should having the probabilities for next words potentially help with these classification tasks. And here I'm just verifying that they are actually useful.
Wait, so SST and AG News without star means you're training a linear layer on top of the whole sentence representation?
No, so without the star here means that, so I guess in the case of AG, let's say in the case of SST, in the third column here, I'm like for every movie review, I pass it through the language model and I get a vector of probabilities for it, which is like, let's say around 50,000 dimensional vector. But now I just look at two coordinates of that vector, the smile and the sad emoticons. And I just take out these probabilities and use that as a feature map. Like it's mapping it now to two-dimensional vectors.
Oh,
and
I
then I'm
see.
learning a linear classifier on top of this using
I
the
see.
labeled it. Yeah. So just the two-dimensional vector can already get up to 80%, which at least the first time we tried it, we found it, I was really surprised. I didn't expect it to be.
I see.
Yeah. And in the next column, it's using a larger set of words, like around 30 words. So it's around a 30-dimensional vector where these words are just selected based on what makes sense. And similarly, we pick different words for the AG News task. So yeah, in this column, I think we pick 4 words. I don't remember the exact words, but there was 1 word for each class relating to sports, science, politics, and something like that.
I see.
Yeah, and bag of words here is just saying that if you just use this is just some to get a sense of what's a good or decent performance number on this task. That was basically it. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and actually later on we'll see how we can use a language model to get better features out of it as well. So I will get to that soon. Okay, so great. So hopefully you're convinced that at least these experiments kind of verify the sentence completion reformulation, and also the additional fact that adding a prompt does improve the performance. Okay, so now I'll formalize this notion of what it means for a classification task to be able to reformulate it as a sentence completion problem. So note that as I said earlier, being able to reformulate it as sentence completion is kind of the same as being able to solve it using a linear classifier on top of the vector of ground truth probabilities, using appropriate weights for different words. And now I'll just formalize this like a bit more. So for that, given any feature map G, I'll define the metric of performance on a classification task using linear classification. And this is actually the standard logistic regression loss that you must have seen. But just to spell it out a bit more, so given any feature map that maps sentences to vectors, let's say in this case, you're mapping all of these input sentences or tasks to vectors. And given the linear classifier V that's trying to separate these vectors, the performance metric for the feature map and the classifier V is just the expected logistic loss. So the logistics loss, just to remind you, is this has a simple form. And this is essentially a surrogate loss to the 0-1 loss, which is whether or not these features and this linear classifier are predicting the label correctly or not, whether they're classifying the two classes or separating the two classes well enough or not. So now we define a tau natural task to be one that has this following loss to be less than tau. So what does this loss denote? So this is the classification loss of using the ground truth probability vectors for the next words as the features. So for every sentence, you use the ground truth probabilities as a feature map. You embed it to this high dimensional vector. And then you learn the best linear classifier on top of these features. And if the best linear classifier can have a small error of tau, that means that you can essentially solve the task as a linear classifier on top of this vector of probabilities here, which in some sense, as we argued earlier, means that you can reformulate it as a sentence completion problem. Or at least it's the opposite way. If you can reformulate it as a sentence completion problem, tau will be small. So tau basically denotes the amenability of a task to a sentence completion reformulation that I described earlier. And note that this reformulation can happen potentially by adding a prompt at the end of the inputs. Okay, so I'll just now briefly describe the takeaways from this part of the talk, which was first, that classification tasks can be rephrased as sentence completion problems. This rephrasing is in some sense the same as being able to solve the task as a linear function of the vector of probabilities, the ground truth probabilities. And this is also verified empirically. And the third is that you can thus formulate classification tasks of interest as tau natural tasks, the definition that I described earlier. So tau being smaller means the classification task satisfies this reformulation. Okay, I'll just pause here for a moment to see if there are any more questions about this reformulation. Okay, great. So now I'll actually move on to describing the language modeling framework in a bit more detail. And in particular, I'll describe the standard softmax parameterization that is used for language models, the cross entropy objective, and the optimal solutions. Sorry, for the cross entropy objective. Okay, so yeah, as before, language model predicting a distribution over the set of all words for any given context. So you can think of this distribution as a vector in V dimensions, where V is the total number of words in the vocabulary. And now the goal of language modeling is to learn this ground truth distribution P star of S. And it kind of tries to do so by minimizing this cross entropy objective that I described earlier. So it's a negative of log probability assigned to words that are actually sampled from this distribution, true distribution P star of S. And now a very basic question to ask about language models is, what is it that the best language model learns? So if you ignored all issues of expressivity, how expressive the model architecture is, or what algorithm is used, or how many samples do you have during training, if I just ignore all of this, what is the optimal solution of this cross entropy objective? And this is actually a very well-known result about the cross entropy objective, which is the minimizer of it actually recovers the ground truth distribution P star of S. So if you could magically minimize this cross entropy objective, you would recover the ground truth distribution. And the proof is actually also quite simple. You can just rewrite the cross entropy objective as a KL divergence plus some constant. And the KL divergence is minimized when it is equal to 0. So, and that happens when you actually are equal to the ground truth distribution. So this here is just saying that, okay, the cross entropy objective makes sense because it is like satisfying the goal that we started out with, which is learning the ground truth distribution. In practice, however, the distributions are actually parameterized by neural networks, etc. And I'm just going to abstract away the details and look at this particular abstraction, which actually holds for all language models in practice, or at least most of them, which is you first embed a given context S using a neural network architecture of choice, popularly the transformers architecture, to a d-dimensional features f of S. So you first map it to some d-dimensional vector, and you then multiply this vector with a matrix of word embeddings to get the logits for different words. So in particular, this matrix of word embeddings has V columns, and each of this column corresponds to a d-dimensional vector for each word. So if you multiply these two, you get a V-dimensional vector, and this is the vector of logits that you typically see in classification. And now you can take a softmax over these logits to get the final softmax distribution P of f of S. So just to spell it out, P of f of S, so this probability for any word, is essentially proportional to the exponential of the inner product of f of S, the features, with the word embedding phi of W for the word W. So it's proportional to this, and you can normalize it to get a distribution. So this is the standard softmax parameterization of the distribution that is used, and this is also used for in the even for like classification tasks. So yeah. Okay, so as before, you are now minimizing the cross entropy objective. So now you are trying to learn a good feature map F and good word embeddings that can minimize this. And now an interesting question arises, which is, can we still learn the ground truth distribution P star of S, especially in the case where the dimensionality of the features is much less than the size of the vocabulary, which is actually true in practice. So D is of the order of 1,000, and the vocabulary size, that is number of words, is of the order of 50,000 or 100,000. And it turns out, because you do not have enough degrees of freedom and without any more assumptions, you actually may not learn the true distribution, ground truth distribution exactly. But what you can show is that for a fixed word embedding matrix phi, the f star, the best feature map that minimizes the cross entropy objective, satisfies the following equality, which is P f star is not equal to P star of S necessarily, but when you multiply both by this word embedding matrix, phi, they are equal. So in simple words, you are guaranteed to learn the ground truth distribution on a subspace, a d-dimensional subspace that is spanned by the word embedding matrix phi. So even though you might not learn it exactly, you're at least guaranteed to learn it in a on a linear subspace. And this is actually interesting, and this is something we'll use later on. And the proof of this is also not too I mean, it's not very complicated actually. It's just using the first order condition of the cross entropy objective. You just compute the gradient and set it to 0. And this is actually what you end up getting. So even though you are using low dimensional embeddings, in some sense, it's not hurting you so much because you're learning at least the distribution on a d-dimensional subspace. If you know what that subspace is, you can just set the word embeddings to be those, for example. I'll just pause here to see if there are any questions.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Are the word embeddings before softmax contextualized word embeddings, or do you multiply by the embeddings of individual words again? Yeah, so that's a good question. So the word embeddings phi here are not contextualized embeddings. They are just fixed word embeddings that are used at the end. It's the equivalent of this in some sense is in a classification problem. It's the final linear layer that you use to compute the logits and the softmax. So these word embeddings do not depend on the input context S. They are just the final, they're just independent of the input S. Does the framework require labels to be part of the vocabulary? No, so we do not actually need to know anything about the downstream task in order to do language modeling. The vocabulary is just determined by some tokenizer by using some statistics of the like unlabeled data itself. You do not need to know the downstream task in order to construct the vocabulary. Okay, I think I got all the questions. Yeah, if I didn't answer them perfectly, please feel free to ask follow-up questions. So another question is, can we measure the capacity of these models? So I'm going to interpret capacity as, let's say, expressivity of these models. Right. So for example, there's a follow-up which says like how many modes they can model. And so my answer to this would be that, first of all, here I'm completely ignoring that. I'm just treating the model as a black box and saying that, let's say it can compute the optimal. But actually there is a separate line of work that is trying to understand what are this model architectures of interest, like the transformer architectures, what all kind of functions can they express, what kind of languages can they generate. And there has been work in trying to generate, let's say, like tree-like structures with some finite depth, etc. So there's like a separate line of work just trying to understand this. And of course, it would be amazing if we could like combine these insights into this kind of analysis. Okay. Yeah, so just to clarify here, I'm just treating the model architecture, the algorithm used to minimize the cross-entropy objective, all of these as black box, and just saying, if I could minimize it to the optimal, what properties would it satisfy? Okay, so quick takeaways from this. First is that the cross-entropy objective kind of makes sense because it at least aims to recover the ground truth distribution piece. And softmax language models that use d-dimensional word embeddings may not learn the ground truth distribution, but they at least learn it on a d-dimensional subspace. And now that we have all the tools at hand, so we know softmax language models, we understand what they learn, and we have characterized classification tasks of interest as natural tasks. I'll present the main theoretical result.
Wait, okay, hold on. So let me understand this correctly.
Sure.
So phi times p means what? Like you're contracting the dimension of vocabulary size. So p is like a vector over the vocabulary, right?
Correct. So p star of s is has length equal to the size of the vocabulary.
And then there's like it's a okay. Phi is like a matrix where it's one side is like size of vocabulary, the other side is like the embedding size.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And then p star of s is a vector probability over the vocabulary.
Correct.
Okay,
So
and
when
you're
you
just contracting over the dimension of number of vocabulary.
In a way, yes. So you're not necessarily picking only D coordinates. For example, if the matrix phi was essentially the subspace that it spanned was some specific D coordinates, then yes, you're just looking at those D coordinates of the probability vector. But the phi matrix could just be any subspace in this V dimensions. So you could be taking potentially D different linear combinations of these probabilities. In other words, I guess.
I see. And in the previous result where you're optimizing the language model, phi is fixed.
Yes. So in the result that I presented here, I assume that phi is fixed, and actually that's a good point. So I forgot to mention that in practice you actually also learn phi.
Right.
Right. And it would all the other question to ask is what is the optimal phi that one would learn as well? And unfortunately, we don't have a good characterization for this yet. So yeah, that's also an important question. Yes.
I see. So if you calculate the gradient over both theta and phi,
Right.
what does it look like?
So it has some weird expressions where it's I guess it's difficult to say in a simple way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very complicated looking, but it has this weird construct where you want to it's some kind of weird decomposition of certain matrix, but it's not the standard singular value decomposition. It will be some kind of decomposition of some matrix. But yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe we can discuss this offline. So,
Sure.
but it has some weird construct where you want to set a vector to be equal to its softmax variant. So it's not very clear what it should look
I see.
like. Yeah, but actually what we did, which I won't talk about here, but what we did was construct a different objective function that also satisfies this property for a fixed phi, the same as cross entropy objective. But for that objective, it has a much cleaner form of the optimal word embeddings as well.
I see.
Which is the SVD of some substitutability matrix that captures the synonym structure in words.
I see.
Yeah, but I'm happy to discuss that offline.
Yeah,
but I'm not
sure.
going to talk about it now. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this was a good question. Okay. So yeah, so this was the takeaway. And now I'll present the main theoretical results. So note that what we wanted to show earlier was that language models that do well on the cross entropy objective, why should they learn features that can solve linear classification tasks of interest? And for that question, so suppose we have the following. Suppose we have a language model with word embeddings phi and feature map f. And suppose this feature map f is epsilon optimal in the cross entropy objective. In other words, if epsilon is small, it basically means that it's doing well on next word prediction. Epsilon being equal to 0 means that you have the optimal language model that I described in the previous 2 slides. And suppose you have a task T that is tau natural. And as I said earlier, classification tasks of interest that can be reformulated as sentence completion problems will be tau natural tasks for small tau. And suppose additionally the word embeddings matrix phi satisfies some nice properties, and I won't get into the details of what these nice properties are, but one simple property to think of is they assign similar embeddings to synonyms, words that are synonyms, let's say. And this is an intuitive property that potentially could be called nice. Then we have the following bound, where on the left hand side, this here is so first of all, this here phi times p of f of s is d-dimensional features for any context s. And the way you obtain it is you pass this context S through a language model. You get the output probabilities, which is probability over the words, and you multiply this with the word embedding matrix phi. So you're getting a d-dimensional vector for every input context S. And the left-hand side is basically saying if you do linear classifiers, a linear classification using these features, what would be the logistic regression loss that you would suffer? So that's the left-hand side. So it's basically evaluating what is the linear classification performance of these features. And the right-hand side is upper bound by 2 terms. The first is tau, which is going to be small if you can rephrase a task as a sentence completion problem. And the second term is something that you suffer because of the suboptimality of the language model. So as I said, you might not learn the optimal language models for various reasons, like expressivity, optimization, or even like not having enough samples. So if you just assume you have an epsilon optimal language model, then you would suffer that additional term of square root epsilon here. So note that epsilon here is a suboptimality with respect to the best softmax model and not necessarily the absolute optimal model. So this epsilon will be smaller than what you might think it is. Okay, and just to see like whether we are even answering the question that we set out to answer. So first of all, we are showing guarantees for a language model that is epsilon optimal in the cross entropy objective. So it's doing well on the cross entropy objective. We're showing that you can extract low dimensional features from such a learned language model, which I'll describe a bit more in the next slide. And finally, we are showing an upper bound on the linear classification performance of these extracted features. So we are showing upper bound on the logistic regression loss for classification tasks of interest. And yeah, logistic regression is like just doing linear classification.
Why does it make sense to talk about like this feature of phi times p?
Right. So I guess one direct answer is, if you had the optimal f star, we know that phi times p of f star is equal to phi times p star.
Right, but I guess like but the features you actually have in the language model is
Right.
like what phi transpose times f.
I guess the features are just f of s, which are d-dimensional.
Oh yeah, sure, right. Like the features are just f, and then to get output you multiply by phi transpose.
Correct. So you first use the f and the phi to get these probabilities, and then you multiply by phi again. And this is not the standard approach. The standard approach is to just use f directly. And I will talk about this a bit actually in the next slide itself. Yeah. Okay, so at least we have shown some ways to extract some features from pre-trained language models, even though that might not be the standard approach. And just to take a closer look at this phi times p of FFS, we just call these the conditional mean features. And a simple way to interpret this is for any input S, you take a weighted combination of the word embeddings, where the weights are determined by the probabilities assigned to words by this context. And now we go back to the table of the sentiment classification performance. So the first two columns are what I showed you earlier, which is to take a few coordinates, like around 30 coordinates out of the vector of probabilities. And now we measure the performance of phi times of FFS, which is in some sense, in a soft way, selecting d directions or d dimensions out of this vector of probabilities. And this is something that naturally showed up in the analysis. And you see that it does better than just manually picking the words. And adding a prompt does boost the performance by quite a bit. And you see that it's still slightly worse than using the standard features themselves. However, it's not too far away from them, but it's still slightly worse. And the same pattern for the AG News dataset. Again, there's like a 3% difference here, but at least it does much better than manually picking the words. And just for fun, we also just check whether the square root epsilon kind of dependence holds in practice, where the y-axis is the left-hand side of the equation, and the x-axis is kind of the right-hand side of the equation. And we measure this for different models at different points during training, and there is some kind of square root epsilon relationship that may or may not say a lot, but it's just interesting that we found something like that. Okay, so I guess in the interest of time, I'll skip this part of it, but I just wanted to say that the key element in showing this result was using some form of Pinsker's inequality. So Pinsker's inequality upper bounds the total variation distance between two distributions by the KL divergence, and the total variation in some sense is the difference in the worst case difference in linear predictor over these probabilities. But actually for our case, we had to show a stronger version of the Pinsker's inequality, which is in some sense a softmax variant of it, where if you only cared about linear predictors in a d-dimensional subspace, then you only suffer the suboptimality with respect to the best softmax language model and not just the absolute value of the KL. And this potentially could be of interest in general. Okay, so I'll just now quickly describe the main takeaways and future work. So first, classification tasks can be rephrased as sentence completion problems, and that's the same as solving them as linear functions over the ground truth probabilities. Using this formalization, you can show epsilon optimal language models will do square root epsilon well on such tasks. And finally, not finally, but one of the things that we showed is that softmax models can actually, without any more assumptions, only hope to learn the true distribution on a subspace. And since the word embeddings determine what the subspace is, it's interesting to try to understand what are nice properties that you want word embeddings to satisfy. And one such properties is assigning similar embeddings to synonyms. And finally, conditional mean features is a mathematically motivated way to extract d-dimensional features for language models, even though it's not the most standard one. And it turned out to do well in practice, which at least at first was surprising to us because it just showed up in the analysis and we just tried it and it did reasonably well. So there was a question about the discrepancy between actually using the standard features themselves and the conditional mean features. So in our paper, we have some more connection between them. So under some Gaussianity like assumptions on the word embeddings, you can show a linear relationship between the two. That f of s is a linear function of the conditional mean features. This linear relationship holds kind of weakly in practice, but at least it's giving some more insight, I guess. We also use insights to design a new objective function, as I described earlier. And finally, I just showed a bound that hid a lot of constants, and some of these constants actually capture other intuitions of when transferring from language model to a downstream task is helpful. Finally, in increasing level of coarseness, like there are a lot of things that can still be explored. One is understanding why the features themselves do better than conditional mean features, and I don't have a very good answer for this actually. So it is happening across the board for many classification tasks, so it might be interesting to understand why. The other is understanding other related models like bidirectional language models or masked language models. Also, can the insights from understanding the benefit on classification tasks help with other NLP tasks? Or do we need some completely different insights, or can we use at least some parts of the tools from here? Another important question is understanding the role of fine-tuning the model. That is not just fixing the features, but fine-tuning them also using labeled data. And also inductive biases of the model architecture that is used or the training algorithm that is used. Like all of these definitely play a role. And it's interesting to see if, like, I don't know if we have the right tools to be able to say anything precise right now, but maybe some combination of empirical exploration and using some more progress that's happening in this field, maybe we could say something interesting here as well. And finally, the general problem of self-supervised learning and representation learning is actually an open problem, because we do have some understanding now, some more theoretical understanding that we had earlier, but I think we are still at the surface and there's a lot more to explore there. Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to present. Thank you all for attending the talk. Feel free to send me an email if you have questions, and there's the archive link for the paper. We are going to update the archive link, I think by the end of this week, so there might be an update soon. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Thanks, Conch. Let's all give a round of applause for the nice talk. Any questions? Please feel free to shout out. But also, if you're shy, you can write it in the chat. Okay, so I have a question. So like, what can this say about? So this is you're treating the neural network training as a black box, right? You're saying like, let's suppose it minimizes this cross entropy. Right. So yeah, so like in particular for neural networks, do you understand if there's any bias towards certain kinds of solution? I mean, like we're not gonna get zero loss, like in practice, right?
Right. And we might not even know why we are not getting zero loss, whether it's expressivity or it's just the optimization algorithm is not taking you there. Yeah, that's actually a very important question. We have been exploring some of this, like we are trying to run experiments to see whether you can actually, some shallow networks can recover the distributions under very simple settings. And it turns out that it's yes and no. It's kind of weird. So you may not recover the distribution exactly, but you may recover, you might still be able to solve a classification task.
The downstream task?
Yes, like because a classification, I mean, you might not be able to solve the regression task maybe, but you could possibly solve the classification task, and that's maybe because it has higher margin, etc. So that's, I guess, one answer. But yeah, I mean, in general, for any particular architecture, like at least like mathematically, I don't have a very good answer of what can it do and what can it not do. There is this interesting line of work that is understanding what can transformers architecture with this self-attention mechanism. What all things can it express? With what depth can it express what kind of functions and these kind of things. And I think those are interesting, and I'm certainly interested in trying to see if there is something that so I guess more broadly here we did not assume any structure on the true distribution, the ground truth distribution. I feel like if you assume some structure on the ground truth distribution that might hold in practice, and then try to understand what these models are learning, that seems like a promising direction. Right. And there are actually some very basic questions that also come out of this, which is, even if you had a linear model, like not even a non-linear neural network, and you train using gradient descent, it's not exactly clear what you learn. For example, I remember you had a paper on like word-to-vec algorithm, which is this linear kind of model, when it was over-parameterized. And this is like, in some sense, the opposite, under-parameterized.
Right.
Severely under-parameterized.
Right.
So yeah, so then it's not clear. Even then, it's not clear what you end up learning. Yeah.
I see. So from this theoretical framework, do you so I noticed you said you mentioned the new objective function. But like, are there any like takeaway for practitioners, like like any new tricks or something to improve their models possibly from these insights?
Right. Yeah. Our best bet was actually the new objective function.
I see.
So in the experiments that we ran, it didn't. I mean, it did pretty well, but it still didn't necessarily match the performance of language models, and we're not really sure why. But we also didn't we didn't tune the parameters of that model a lot. We just used the default values that were used for language modeling. Yeah. So we are hoping that there is something that can come out of that. The other thing I guess I would say is the role of these word embeddings. So in some sense, this word embeddings is determining what part of the ground truth distribution you're learning.
Right.
And if you know what part you are interested in, you could perhaps encode that information into the word embeddings using like some of the like analysis from here.
Right.
So there might not be a concrete thing right now, but yeah, I think it could be something interesting there.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. Okay, any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, another round of applause. Thanks, Nikanj. I'm sure you can feel free to contact him for any questions you have. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, this is it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending and asking the questions. And yeah, feel free to ask me the questions via email. Yeah, thank you, Greg, for the inviting.
Yeah.